Oran had heard stories about humans his entire life. Every species in the galaxy had stories about them. Some spoke of humans with respect. Others spoke with fear. A few refused to speak of them at all. But everyone had something to say. They were not a species that believed in stories. They were insects, tall and thin, with hard shells and compound eyes that saw the world in numbers and patterns. They did not feel emotions the way other species did. They analyzed. They calculated. They made decisions based on facts, not feelings. This was why Oran found the human stories so strange. The facts did not match the reputation. Humans had only discovered faster than light travel 300 years ago. In galactic terms, they were children, bobbies. They had been traveling between stars for 12,000 years. They had been doing it for 8,000. Even the peaceful had been spacefaring for 2,000 years before humans left their little blue world. Yet somehow, these young creatures had earned a place at the highest tables of galactic power. Somehow, ancient civilizations treated them as equals. Somehow, their name carried weight that their history could not explain. Oran did not believe in mysteries. He believed in data. And so, when his government offered him a position observing a human diplomatic delegation, he accepted immediately. He would study these creatures. He would find the logical explanation for their fame. He would debunk the myths once and for all. The Galactic Council Station hung in orbit around a neutral world, a massive structure of metal and glass where species from across the galaxy came to talk and trade and make peace. Oran arrived 3 days before the human delegation. He prepared his observation equipment. He reviewed everything they knew about human biology, psychology, and culture. He was ready. The humans arrived on a ship called the Messenger. It was not a large ship, not impressive by galactic standards. Oran noted this. Perhaps humans were not as powerful as the stories suggested. Then the humans walked off their ship, and Oran's confusion began. There were 7 of them. They moved in a tight group, talking and laughing with each other. One of them, a large male with dark skin, put his arm around a smaller female and squeezed her shoulder. She punched his arm lightly and said something that made the others laugh louder. Oran watched this with his compound eyes clicking in confusion. Physical contact between colleagues was considered unprofessional in most galactic cultures. Loud emotional displays were seen as primitive. These humans seemed to have no understanding of proper behavior. The leader of the delegation was a woman named Ambassador Sarah. She was small by human standards, with gray hair and lines on her face that showed her age. When she saw Oran waiting in the docking bay, she walked straight toward him with her hand extended. "You must be the observer," she said. Her voice was warm. "I'm Sarah. It's wonderful to meet you." Oran stared at her hand. He knew this human custom. They touched palms as a greeting. It was strange, but he had prepared for it. He extended his own clawed hand, and she grasped it firmly. Her skin was soft and warm. He could feel her pulse through her palm. It was faster than he expected, full of life and energy. The touch lasted only a moment, but it left him unsettled in ways he could not explain. "I am Oran," he said. "I am here to observe your delegation and report to my government." "Wonderful," Ambassador said, and she smiled at him. It was a strange expression, showing teeth in a way that would be threatening in other species. But her eyes were kind. "Please observe all you like. We have nothing to hide." Over the next several days, Oran observed everything. He watched the humans eat. They consumed a wide variety of foods, often mixing flavors that seemed incompatible. They talked while they ate, sharing stories and jokes. Sometimes they laughed so hard that food came out of their noses. This was apparently not embarrassing to them. He watched the humans work. They were surprisingly efficient when focused, but they took frequent breaks to talk with each other about topics completely unrelated to their work. They asked about each other's families, their health, their feelings. They seemed to genuinely care about the answers. He watched the humans interact with other species. They were curious about everyone, asking questions that sometimes bordered on rude. But they did not mean offense. They simply wanted to understand. When they made mistakes, they apologized quickly and tried to learn. None of this explained their reputation. The humans were friendly, they were emotional, they were chaotic and loud and strange, but they were not frightening. They were not powerful, they were just odd little creatures who touched too much and laughed too easily. Oran began to think that the galaxy had been fooled. Perhaps humans were simply good at making others like them. Perhaps their fame was built on charm rather than substance. Then the war began. It happened during a formal dinner. All the delegations had gathered in the great hall of the council station to celebrate the signing of a minor trade agreement. Oran was there, standing in the corner, watching as always. Ambassador was seated at the human table, laughing at something one of her colleagues had said. She had a glass of red wine in her hand. She seemed completely relaxed. The announcement came through the station's communication system. The voice was calm and official, but the words were anything but calm. Attention all delegations. The hegemony of has declared war on the Compact of Free Worlds. Forces have invaded space. All diplomatic channels are now closed. Emergency protocols are in effect. The great hall erupted into chaos. Species began shouting in dozens of languages. Some ran for the exits. Others stood frozen in shock. The delegation, a group of gentle creatures with soft gray skin, began to weep. Oran watched it all with his compound eyes. They were conquerors. They had been expanding their territory for centuries, swallowing smaller species, destroying those who resisted. They were peaceful farmers. They had no military. They had no chance. The war would be short and brutal. They would be destroyed. It was simple mathematics. Then Oran looked at the human table, and his calculations stopped. Ambassador had not moved. She had not screamed or run or frozen. She sat perfectly still, her wine glass in her hand, her eyes fixed on something far away. The chaos of the hall swirled around her, but she was an island of calm in the storm. Her colleagues had gone quiet too. They were watching her, waiting. The large male who had laughed so easily before now had a face like stone. Slowly, Ambassador set down her wine glass. The small click of glass on table was somehow louder than all the shouting in the hall. She stood up. "Well," she said, and her voice carried across the room with an authority that made species twice her size fall silent. "I suppose it's time to remind the galaxy why they should have left our friends alone." She smiled, but it was not the warm smile she had given Oran in the docking bay. This smile was something else entirely. It was the smile of a predator. It was the smile of a species that had been fighting since before they had fire. Oran felt something he had never felt before. His species did not have a word for it, but he recognized it nonetheless. It was fear. For the first time, he understood that he did not understand humans at all. And for the first time, he wanted to know why the galaxy whispered their name. The answer, he suspected, would change everything he believed. The human ship was called the Thermopylae. Oran stood in the docking bay of the massive carrier, watching as thousands of humans moved around him like a river of organized chaos. Soldiers checked weapons. Engineers ran diagnostic tests. Officers shouted orders that seemed impossible to follow, yet somehow everyone knew exactly where to go. His government had arranged for him to join the human fleet as an official observer. They wanted to know what the humans could do. They wanted intelligence on weapons, tactics, and capabilities. They wanted data. Oran wanted something else now. He wanted to understand. A human sergeant had been assigned to guide him. His name was Cole, and he was old for a human soldier, with gray in his short hair and scars on his arms that spoke of battles survived. He had kind eyes, but they were the kind of eyes that had seen terrible things. "Welcome aboard the Thermopylae," said as he led Oran through the busy corridors. "She's a good ship, seen a lot of action." "Thermopylae," Oran repeated, his mandibles clicking over the strange word. "What does this name mean?" Was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "It was a battle, a very old battle from before we left Earth, about 2,500 years ago." "A victory." "No," stopped walking and turned to face Oran. "It was a defeat. 300 soldiers held a narrow pass against an army of hundreds of thousands. They knew they would die. They fought anyway. They bought time for others to escape." Oran's compound eyes clicked in confusion. "You name your warship after a defeat. This seems unwise. Would it not be better to name it after a victory?" Smiled, but it was not a happy smile. "Look around you. Read the names." Oran looked. He saw the names painted on equipment sewn into uniforms displayed on screens. He saw names he did not recognize: Alamo, Stalingrad, Dunkirk, Masada, Drift. "These are all battles?" he asked. "Yes." "Were they all defeats?" "Some were victories, some were defeats, most were stands, places where our people decided that some things matter more than survival, places where we held the line no matter the cost." Started walking again. "We remember them because they remind us who we are." Oran followed, his mind working to process this information. Most species remember their victories. They forget their defeats. This is logical. Defeats are failures. They show weakness. "Maybe," said, "but defeats show something else too. They show what we're willing to sacrifice. They show that we don't stop fighting just because we can't win." He paused at a doorway and looked back at Oran. "The galaxy thinks humans are dangerous because of our weapons or our tactics. They're wrong. We're dangerous because we don't know how to quit." The door opened into a large room filled with soldiers preparing for battle. They sat on benches, checking their gear, talking in low voices. But what caught Oran's attention was the sound. Someone was singing. It started with one voice, low and rough. Then another joined in. Then another. Soon, dozens of voices were singing together, a slow song with heavy words that Oran did not understand. He turned to, "What are they doing?" "Singing," said simply. "Why?" "Because that's what humans do before battle. We sing the old songs, the ones our ancestors sang, the ones about sacrifice and courage and standing firm." Closed his eyes, listening. "This one is about a war from 400 years ago. My great-great-grandfather fought in that war. He died on a beach, far from home, fighting for people he never met." "And you remember this?" "We remember everything." Opened his eyes. "Every battle, every sacrifice, every person who gave their life so others could live. We carry them with us always. They are part of us." Oran stood in silence, listening to the song. It was strange and beautiful and terrible all at once. He could not understand the words, but he understood the feeling. There was sorrow in it. There was pride. There was something harder to name, something that made his shell feel cold. "Your species has been fighting for a very long time," he said finally. "Since the beginning," agreed. "We were fighting wars before we had metal, before we had writing, before we had fire maybe. War is in our blood, in our bones, in our genes." He watched his fellow soldiers with a mixture of love and sadness. "We have never known peace. Not really. Not for more than a generation. There is always another war. There is always another enemy. There is always another reason to fight. This seems like a terrible existence." "It is," turned to face Oran fully. "But it made us what we are. It taught us how to suffer, how to endure, how to keep going when everything is lost, how to find meaning in the fight itself." He gestured at the singing soldiers. "These men and women are not afraid of death. They are not afraid of pain. They are afraid of only one thing." "What?" "Failing the ones who came before, failing the ones who will come after, failing to be worthy of the sacrifice." Put his hand on Oran's shoulder. The touch was warm and heavy. "Do you understand now? We don't fight because we think we'll win. We fight because fighting is what we do. It's who we are. It's all we know." The song ended, and for a moment there was silence. Then the soldiers began to move, picking up their weapons, checking their armor one last time. Their faces were calm. Their eyes were clear. They looked like people who had accepted something terrible and found peace in the acceptance. Oran thought about the peaceful farmers facing an army of conquerors. He thought about the brutal and efficient, expecting an easy victory. He thought about all the calculations he had made, all the predictions based on numbers and logic. None of his calculations had accounted for this. None of his predictions had included a species that named their ships after defeats and sang songs of ancient dead before battle. None of his logic could explain why these soft, short-lived creatures seemed so utterly unafraid of what was coming. "You are all going to die," he said quietly. It was not a threat or an insult. It was simply the truth as he understood it. They were too strong. The battle was unwinnable. The mathematics were clear. Smiled. It was the same smile Ambassador had worn in the council hall. The smile of a predator. The smile of a species that had been fighting since before time. "Probably," he said. "But we're going to make them pay for every inch. We're going to show them what it means to fight humans. And when they finally break through, when they stand over our bodies and think they've won, they're going to realize something terrible." "What?" "That there are more of us coming. There are always more of us coming. We don't stop. We don't surrender. We don't forget." Eyes were hard now, hard as stone. "You can kill us. You can burn our worlds and scatter our ashes across the stars. But you cannot break us. Because we carry 10,000 years of war in our hearts, and we will fight until the last human draws the last breath." The ship shuddered as it entered hyperspace, carrying them toward the war. Around them, the soldiers began to sing again. A different song this time, faster and fiercer. Oran listened, and for the first time in his life, he felt something that might have been hope. Not because he believed the humans would win. The numbers were still against them. But because he was beginning to understand that humans did not fight with numbers. They fought with something else, something older, something that could not be calculated or predicted. They fought with everything they were, and everything they had ever been. And that, perhaps, was worth more than all the weapons in the galaxy. They had conquered Prime in 6 days. Oran read the reports with growing horror. They had no army. They had no weapons. They had tried to surrender on the first day, hoping to save their people through peace. They had killed the surrender party and continued their assault. Now the cities burned. The farms were destroyed. They were being gathered into camps where they disappeared and never returned. It was not conquest. It was extermination. The compact fleet had tried to stop them. 40 ships from 8 different species had faced the armada in the space above Prime. The battle lasted 3 hours. When it was over, only 7 compact ships remained, limping away from the slaughter with their hulls torn open and their crews dying. They controlled the system. Nothing could stop them now. Nothing could save the... except perhaps the humans. Oran stood on the observation deck of the Thermopylae, watching the stars stream past as the ship traveled through hyperspace. Around him, the carrier hummed with activity. 10,000 soldiers prepared for battle. Pilots ran final checks on their fighters. Engineers tested weapons that could crack planets. But Oran was not thinking about the ship. He was thinking about what he had seen when the human fleet gathered at the staging point. He had expected a response. The humans were allies of they would send ships, perhaps a dozen, perhaps 2 dozen, enough to make a statement to show the galaxy that attacks on their friends would not go unanswered. He had not expected what actually arrived. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace in waves. First came the scouts, small and fast. Then the destroyers, bristling with weapons. Then the cruisers, each one larger than any ship ever built. Then the carriers, massive beasts of metal and fire, each one carrying thousands of fighters and tens of thousands of soldiers. And behind them the transports, hundreds of transport ships packed tight with ground troops, Infantry, tanks, artillery, everything an army needed to liberate a world. Oran had counted the ships. He had run the numbers through his analytical mind again and again, certain that he had made an error. There was no error. The humans had sent everything. 347 warships, 289 transport vessels, over 2 million soldiers, the entire might of the human military gathered in one place, aimed at one target. It was impossible. It should have been impossible. The logistics alone should have taken months. The coordination should have been a nightmare. No species could mobilize this quickly, this completely. But the humans had done it in 12 days. Admiral Way stood at the center of the fleet, commanding from the bridge of the carrier Unity. Oran had been permitted to observe the command center, and what he saw there confused him as much as everything else about humans. The admiral was a small woman with silver hair and a face lined with age. She looked like someone's grandmother. She spoke softly, almost gently, but when she gave orders, everyone obeyed instantly. There was no hesitation, no question. Her crews trusted her completely. She had sent one message to when the fleet arrived. Oran had heard it through the communication systems. This is Admiral Way of the United Earth Navy. You have 12 hours to withdraw all forces from Prime. Any ship or soldier remaining after that time will be destroyed. This is not a negotiation. They had not responded. They did not negotiate with lesser species. They conquered and destroyed. That was their way. Now the 12 hours were almost over. Oran found Cole on the observation deck, staring out at the stars like Oran had been. The old sergeant looked tired but calm. He was holding something in his hand, a small metal disc on a chain. "What is that?" Oran asked. Held it up so Oran could see. On one side was a human woman's face. On the other was a symbol Oran did not recognize. "My grandmother said. She was a soldier too. She gave this to my mother who gave it to me. I carry it in every battle." "Why?" "To remember, to carry her with me." Tucked the disc back inside his armor. "When we fight, we don't fight alone. We fight with everyone who came before us, everyone who sacrificed, everyone who believed in something worth dying for." Oran was quiet for a moment. Then he asked the question that had been burning in his analytical mind since the fleet gathered. "Why have you come in such force? They are not humans. They are not even close allies. Your governments have traded for less than 50 years. Why risk so many lives for strangers?" Looked at him with an expression Oran could not read. "They asked for help." "That is all. They asked, so you came." "Yes. But the cost, the resources, the lives that will be lost, it does not make logical sense." Smiled, and it was a sad smile, a tired smile. "No, I suppose it doesn't." "Then why?" "Because that's who we are," turned back to the stars. "We don't calculate the worth of people who need us. We don't weigh lives against resources. When someone asks for help, we help. When someone needs us, we come. It doesn't matter if we know them. It doesn't matter if we'll win. What matters is that they called out and we answered. This seems like a weakness, a flaw in your species. You will exhaust yourselves saving others." "Maybe," shrugged, "but I'd rather be exhausted than be the species that let good people die alone. I'd rather lose everything than know we could have helped and didn't." He looked at Oran with hard eyes. "The galaxy is full of species that only fight for themselves, that only care about their own survival. What's the point of surviving if you lose what makes you worth saving?" A chime sounded through the ship. The 12 hours were over. Admiral's voice came through the speakers, calm and clear. "All hands to battle stations. Today we show thee and the galaxy what happens when you hurt our friends. Today we remind the universe why they should never have touched the people under our protection. Fight well, fight hard, and remember who you are." Around Oran, humans began to move. They moved quickly but without panic. They knew exactly what to do. They had been doing it for 10,000 years. As walked toward his unit, He paused and looked back at Iran. "Stay close to me during the battle," he said. "I'll keep you safe." "Why?" Iran asked. "I am not human, I am not your ally, I am only an observer." Smiled. It was the warmest smile Iran had ever seen on a human face. "Because you're with us now," he said. "And we don't leave anyone behind, not friends, not strangers, not even confused bug people who ask too many questions." He walked away, laughing toward his troops. Iran stood alone on the observation deck, watching the stars. Soon those stars would be filled with fire and death. Soon the humans would throw themselves against and many of them would die. They knew this, they accepted it, they came anyway. Because someone had asked for help. Iran had spent his whole life believing in logic, in numbers, in calculations that made sense. Now he stood in the middle of something that made no sense at all, and for the first time he did not want to analyze it. He just wanted to understand it. The fleet emerged from hyperspace above Prime, and the battle began. The drop pod hit the ground hard enough to shake Iran's shell. Around him, human soldiers were already moving. The pod doors blew open and they poured out into the burning ruins of a city. Smoke filled the air. Fire crackled from destroyed buildings. Somewhere in the distance, weapons screamed as they fired. Iran followed Cole and his squad into the chaos. He had been given armor, human armor modified to fit his body. It was heavy and strange, but it would keep him alive. That was what it said anyway. "Stay behind me," ordered, his voice crackling through the communication system. "Don't stop moving, don't freeze up. If I fall, follow Sergeant Williams. And if she falls, then follow whoever's still standing." Checked his weapon and moved forward. Welcome to war. The battle for Prime was unlike anything Iran had calculated. His models had predicted the outcome with 97% certainty. They were superior in technology. They held the high ground. They had fortified positions and supply lines and every advantage that mattered in modern warfare. The humans had none of these things. They were fighting uphill, in unfamiliar terrain, against an enemy that had been preparing for weeks. By every logical measure, the assault should have failed in the first hour. But the humans did not fight by logic. Iran watched them advance through fire that should have been impossible to survive. Energy weapons turned the air into lightning. Explosions tore craters in the ground. Soldiers fell, screaming, dying. And still the humans pushed forward. "Move, move, move," shouted, leading his squad through a ruined street. Soldiers had set up a defensive position at the far end, pouring fire into anything that moved. 3 humans fell in the first seconds. The others did not stop. They did not hesitate. They ran toward the guns. A young woman, barely old enough to be called a soldier, pulled a wounded comrade behind a wall. Iran saw her take a hit to her shoulder. She did not stop. She kept dragging, kept moving, kept fighting. When she got her comrade to safety, she turned back toward the enemy and opened fire with her one good arm. "Why does she not retreat?" Iran demanded. "She is wounded, she cannot fight effectively." "Because is still out there," said, pointing to another soldier pinned down in the open. "She won't leave him." "But she will die." "Probably," his voice was calm. "But she won't let him die alone, that's not who we are." The woman charged out of cover, firing as she ran. The focused on her. Bullets and energy beams traced lines through the air around her body. She took another hit to her leg and stumbled. She kept going. She reached, grabbed him by his armor and started dragging him back. She was hit again and again. Her armor was torn to pieces. Blood ran down her face, but she did not stop, she did not let go. She made it back to cover, was alive. She collapsed beside him, breathing hard, bleeding from a dozen wounds, and she smiled. "Told you I'd get you," she said too. "Don't ever bet against me." Iran stared at her. His analytical mind tried to process what he had just seen. The calculations were impossible. She should have died. The probability of success was less than 3%. No rational being would have taken those odds. But she had not calculated. She had not analyzed. She had simply seen someone who needed her and she had gone. "This is insane," Oran said. "Yes," agreed. "It is. Now keep moving." The battle continued through the day and into the night. Oran lost track of time. He lost track of everything except the humans around him, these strange, impossible creatures who refused to stop fighting. He saw a medic sprint across open ground to reach a wounded civilian that had been killing civilians for sport. This one had been shot and left to die in the street. The medic, a small woman named, ran straight into the kill zone to reach her. She was hit 3 times before she reached the. She kept running. She threw herself over the civilian's body, shielding her with her own flesh. Then she began working, pulling out bandages and medical supplies, treating wounds while bullets sparked off her broken armor. "Get her out of there," shouted into his communicator. "We need covering fire." The squad opened up on the position. Other squads joined in. For 30 seconds, the air was filled with so much fire that Oran could not see. When it cleared, was carrying the civilian on her back, stumbling toward safety. "Why?" Oran grabbed his arm. "Why do you do this? She is not human. She is not even your ally. She is just a civilian from a species you barely know." Looked at him with eyes that were tired and sad and burning with something that Oran could not name. "Because she's a person," said. "Because she needed help, because that's what humans do. We run toward the fire, we always have, we always will." Made it back to cover. The civilian was alive, collapsed against a wall, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her armor was destroyed. Her body was broken, but she was smiling too. "Got her," she whispered, "got her." Night fell over the battlefield. They retreated to their fortified positions. The humans did not pursue. They were too tired, too wounded, too depleted. But they had taken the city. They had broken the advance. They had shown that the conquerors could be stopped. Oran sat in the ruins of a building, watching the humans around him. They were exhausted. Many were wounded. Some would not survive the night. But none of them complained. None of them asked why they were here, why they were dying for strangers on a world far from home. They knew why. They had always known. Then in the darkness, someone began to sing. It was a low sound at first, barely audible over the crackling fires and distant explosions. But it spread. Voice joined voice, soldier joined soldier, until thousands of humans were singing together. The song rose up into the smoke-filled sky, a battle hymn from some ancient war, words that Oran did not understand but somehow felt in his shell. They heard it too. Oran could see them in their fortified positions, staring down at the human lines. They had never heard anything like this. No species sang in the middle of battle. No species celebrated when they were outnumbered and dying by the hundreds. But the humans were not celebrating. They were doing something else, something that Oran finally understood. They were remembering. They were carrying their ancestors with them into battle. They were connecting themselves to everyone who had ever fought and died for something that mattered. They were drawing strength from 10,000 years of war, from every sacrifice, from every stand, from every defeat that had been transformed into legend. They began to retreat, not because they were defeated. Their forces were still superior. Their technology was still better. By every logical measure, they were still winning. But they were retreating anyway, because they could see something in those singing soldiers that no weapon could match. They could see a species that did not know how to quit, a species that found joy in the fight itself, a species that would keep coming, keep pushing, keep dying until there was nothing left. Oran stood up and walked to where sat, his back against a broken wall, his voice raised in song with all the others. "I understand now," Oran said. Stopped singing and looked up at him. "Understand what?" "Why the galaxy whispers your name, why ancient species treat you as equals, why everyone has stories about humans." Oran's compound eyes reflected the fires burning all around them. It is not your weapons, it is not your tactics, it is not your technology. Then what is it? Oran looked out at the singing soldiers, at the wounded who refused to stop fighting, at the dead who had given everything for strangers they had never met. It is your hearts, he said. You have hearts that do not break, hearts that do not surrender, hearts that burn with something that cannot be calculated or predicted or destroyed. He turned back to, you are terrifying and beautiful, and I do not know if the galaxy deserves creatures like you. Smiled, it was a tired smile, a bloody smile, but it was real. Maybe not, he said, but we're here anyway, and we're not going anywhere. He started singing again, and this time Oran listened and tried to understand the words. 1 year had passed since the liberation of Prime. Oran stood in the memorial fields, looking out at the rows of white markers that stretched to the horizon. Each marker bore a name, a human name, the name of someone who had come to save strangers and never went home. There were 47,000 of them. They had built this memorial themselves. They had carved each marker by hand, in the traditional way of their people. They had planted flowers around every grave, flowers that bloomed in colors the humans had never seen. They tended this place with the same care they had once given their farms, back before the war, back before they came to destroy everything they had built. The war was over now. The hegemony of had been broken. Their fleets were destroyed. Their armies were scattered. Their leaders were being tried for their crimes against thee and a dozen other species. The compact stood victorious, saved by humans who had refused to let their friends die alone. Oran walked slowly between the graves. He read the names as he passed. Cole, Sarah, James Williams. Names he did not recognize, names of people he had never met, but he remembered them anyway. He remembered what they had done, what they had given. He stopped at one marker and stood in silence for a long time. Cole, Sergeant, United Earth Army, died protecting civilians during the Battle of City. The old soldier had fallen on the 3rd day of the ground campaign. He had been leading a group of civilians to safety when they had ambushed them, had ordered his squad to keep moving while he held off the enemy alone. He had killed 17 soldiers before they finally brought him down. He had been found with his weapon still in his hands and a smile on his face. Oran had been there when they buried him. He had watched the humans carry their fallen friend with such gentleness, such reverence. He had heard them speak of his life, his family, his dreams, his sacrifice. He had seen them weep without shame. Now Oran reached into his travel bag and pulled out a small metal disc on a chain. His grandmother's face looked up at him from the worn surface. I brought this back to your family, Oran said quietly to the grave. Your daughter wanted me to leave it with you. She said you would want her to have it, but she said no. She said it belongs here with you, with all the ones who came before. He placed the disc at the base of the marker and stepped back. An elderly approached him. She moved slowly, her soft gray skin marked with scars from the occupation. She had been one of the civilians had saved. She came to his grave every day. You were his friend, she said to Oran. It was not a question. I knew him for a short time, but yes, I believe he was my friend. They looked out at the endless rows of graves. Her eyes, large and dark, were filled with something that Oran had learned to recognize as grief. They came when no one else would, she said. They died so we could live, strangers, creatures from a world so far away that we could not even see their star from our sky, and yet they gave everything for us. She turned to Oran. How do we ever repay such a debt? Oran had asked himself this question many times over the past year. He still did not have an answer. I do not know, he said honestly. Perhaps there is no repayment, perhaps there is only remembrance. They nodded slowly. We will remember. My people will remember for as long as we exist. We will tell our children and they will tell their children until the end of time. She touched his marker with gentle fingers. They will never be forgotten, not here, not ever. A ceremony was being held at the center of the memorial fields. Humans and representatives from across the compact had gathered to honor the fallen. Oran had been asked to speak. He had agreed, though he still did not know what to say. He walked toward the gathering, leaving the woman at its grave. She would stay there for hours, as she always did, speaking to him, thanking him, keeping him company so he would not be alone. The crowd parted as Oran approached the platform. He saw humans in their dress uniforms, faces solemn and proud. He saw in their traditional robes, their eyes still red from weeping. He saw representatives from a dozen other species, all watching him with curiosity and something like respect. He climbed onto the platform and looked out at them all. "I am Oran," he said. "1 year ago I was sent to observe the human military. My government wanted data. They wanted intelligence. They wanted to understand why humans were so famous across the stars." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I have spent this year trying to answer that question. I have analyzed every battle. I have studied every tactic. I have calculated every statistic. And I have found nothing. No data that explains what I witnessed. No analysis that captures what these creatures truly are." The crowd was silent, waiting. "You ask me to explain humanity's fame across the stars. I cannot. There are no numbers that measure what I saw. No equations that describe why a species would bleed for strangers. I can only tell you what I witnessed with my own eyes." Oran looked out at the graves, at the endless rows of white markers, at the flowers and the tears and the memory. "I saw them march into hell singing songs of their ancestors, songs about wars fought thousands of years ago, about sacrifices made by people whose names they still remembered. They carried their dead with them always. They drew strength from everyone who had ever fought and fallen before them. I saw them carry their wounded through fire and refuse to leave their dead. I saw soldiers run into certain death to save comrades they had known for only days. I saw medics shield strangers with their own bodies. I saw courage that every calculation I had ever made. I saw them weep for fallen enemies and share their rations with prisoners. Even in the depths of war, they did not lose their compassion. They did not become the monsters they were fighting. They remained human, always human, in ways that I still do not fully understand. I saw them do impossible things, not because they believed they would survive, but because they believed it was right. They did not fight for victory. They did not fight for glory. They fought because someone needed them, because someone had called for help, and that apparently was enough." Oran's voice grew stronger. "The humans have a saying, 'Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends.' I did not understand these words when I first heard them. I thought it was poetry, symbolism, something that intelligent beings would not actually believe. I was wrong. The humans consider us their friends, all of us, every species that asks for their help, every world that cries out in need. They do not calculate the worth of friendship. They do not weigh lives against resources. They simply love, and then they fight for the ones they love, and then they die for them if that is what is required." He looked directly at the human delegation. They stood tall and quiet, their faces unreadable. "I do not know if we deserve such devotion. I do not know if any species in this galaxy has earned the sacrifice of these 47,000 souls. But I know this. As long as humanity stands among the stars, no species that asks for help will ever stand alone. The thought they could break us. They thought that if they were strong enough, cruel enough, terrible enough, we would surrender. They did not understand what they were facing. They did not understand that the humans do not break. They do not surrender. They do not stop. And that is why the galaxy whispers their name." Oran stepped back from the platform. The crowd was silent for a long moment. Then a human began to clap, then another, then 100 more. The applause spread through the memorial fields like a wave, washing over the graves of the fallen, carrying their memory up into the sky. Oran watched and felt something strange in his chest, something warm, something that his species was not supposed to feel. He thought it might be hope. After the ceremony, he found the human ambassador waiting for him. She was different now, older, her face marked by the weight of the past year, but her eyes were still kind. Her smile was still warm. "That was a beautiful speech," she said. "It was the truth. The best speeches usually are." She looked out at the graves. "What will you do now?" Oran considered the question. His government wanted him to return home. They wanted his reports, his data, his analysis. They wanted to understand humans so they could predict them, control them, use them. But Oran was done with analysis. He was done with calculations. He had spent a year watching humans, and he had finally understood something that could not be measured. "I have accepted a position at the Terran Military Academy," he said. "They have invited me to teach relations, to help humans understand other species, and to help other species understand humans." The ambassador smiled. "That sounds like important work." "Yes," Oran looked at her. "My first lecture will begin with a single question. I will ask my students, what would you die for? And what answer do you expect?" "I do not know, but I have learned that humans always have an answer. That is what makes them what they are. That is why the galaxy will never forget them." He turned and walked back toward the graves, toward the endless rows of white markers, toward the memory of those who had given everything for strangers they had never met. Behind him, humans and a dozen other species stood together in silence, honoring the fallen, remembering the sacrifice. And somewhere, carried on the wind, Oran thought he heard singing. The old songs, the battle hymns, the voices of the dead, still fighting, still marching, still refusing to be forgotten. He listened, and for the first time in his life, he understood why the galaxy whispered the name of humanity. Not with fear, not with confusion. With gratitude.